You're listening to the Fresh Hell podcast. Fresh Hell contains stories of a disturbing and often graphic nature and is intended for a mature audience. Please don't let your kids listen to this, or they might turn out like us.
I am Madison Timmons.
I'm Chris Soucy.
And we're paranormal specialists who live in the most haunted city on Earth, Savannah, Georgia. Every day is Halloween in our line of work, so join us as we spin true tales of haunts, murders, and disturbing Savannah history.
Hi, I'm Annie from the US.
And I'm Johanna from Austria, and you are listening to your favorite international podcast. You just heard the promo for the most haunted city on Earth. I know that Annie and I both love Savannah.
Love it.
Even though I didn't spend much time there, but with the help of this podcast, I can learn more about the spooky fuckery going on in this hauntingly beautiful city. I know this podcast will be right up our listeners' alley, so check it out. The most haunted city on Earth.
Is it? I can't wait to listen to that podcast. I do love Savannah. And I should add that we're not only your favorite international podcast, but we're also your favorite history and female-hosted podcast. That's right. Last Friday was the 17th annual People's Choice Podcast Awards, and thanks to you, we were actually nominated in 4 categories: True Crime, Best Female Hosted, History, and People's Choice. And we won History and Best Female Hosted. We were absolutely shocked, sincerely stunned.
Shooketh. I was shooketh. I think you felt the
Yeah.
same. We were both pretty sure that we wouldn't stand a chance this year. There were so many huge podcasts nominated, and even making it onto the slate was an absolute honor. But you did it. You voted for us, and we are beyond thankful. Especially the History Award is a true honor for me. I would love to find my high school history teacher, who was tiny bit unfair to me when I graduated in history, and tell him about that. I'm still salty after 24 years.
I'm here for it. Let's find him.
Congratulations to all the winners. We are thrilled for all of you talented people out there. And a special shout out to Woody from Real Life, Real Crime, who won the True Crime category this year, which is amazing. In my opinion, it's one of the toughest categories to win.
Yeah, absolutely. You might remember Woody from our Axeman of New Orleans episode, and we do want to congratulate him and the Real Life, Real Crime fans out there. Woody, you're going to need a bigger trophy cabinet, my friend. Seriously, though, we could not be happier for you and all of the other winners. It was great. It was a really exciting and fun night. On a more serious note, I am sorry that we were not able to do an episode for you the last couple of weeks. My really wonderful mother-in-law, who was 89, her health had been starting to decline a bit over the last couple of years, but unfortunately she had a sort of rapid turn of events, and I'm glad Paul was there when it happened, and we were able to get her sister over from the UK, and we arrived in Florida, with enough time to spend with some actual time with her before she unfortunately passed away. She was a really remarkable woman and a wonderful mother and a wonderful mother-in-law, and I'm very, very grateful that she was in my life. So, sorry for missing all of you, and thank you for understanding. All right, let's get into something spooky before I start to cry, okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
We shall get into something spooky now.
Yeah.
So, we're back, and right in time for Spooky Fuckery Month.
Yes.
October is finally upon us, and just like every year, the episodes in this month will be more in tune with the mysterious, the scary, and the creepy things in life.
Yeah, spooky fuckery.
Yeah, exactly. And just like every other year, we will end October with our Halloween Listener Stories episode. Thank you so much for sending us emails with your stories. We can't wait for that episode. Okay, now, today we thought it would be interesting to talk about curses. And we talked about cursed objects last year, October 2021. But this year we want to talk about a cursed movie. And I'm so excited for this. If you listen to our episodes for a long time, you know that I'm an absolute movie enthusiast. I hate the word cineast, with the fire of 1,000 suns.
Yeah.
But I do love movies. It started when my dad came home from what here we called a videotheque, so like a Blockbuster where you would rent your movies, right?
Yes.
On Saturday, and whenever he would rent 2 new hit movies, he could rent one older movie for free, and he always brought something for me. Also, I secretly watched way too many art house movies that were not meant for my age, but I loved it, and so started my lifelong love affair with the silver screen. So yeah, this episode is totally up my alley.
Nice. Yeah, my parents also love old movies. They have very specific favorites, lots of classics that we know really well. My mom was also so good with trivia about old movies, like in the original Trivial Pursuit game, that pink wedge where it was all questions about movie stars from the 50s and 40s and stuff. She was really good at that category.
I would have loved to play Trivial Pursuit with your mom.
Oh, so much fun. You two couldn't have been on the same team, though. That would have been unfair.
Now, let me start off by saying that I didn't watch the Poltergeist until I was 39 or 40, maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know if some of you can relate. Okay, but when I was a kid, Poltergeist came out when I was 3 years old in 1982. So I constantly heard grown-ups talking, how scary Poltergeist was. And over the years, I did build up this movie in my head to be insanely scary, impossible to watch horror movie, and I wouldn't be able to sleep or go to the bathroom in the night for weeks. And so I always refused to watch it.
Yeah, same. It's so funny because exactly the same. I was 5 when it came out. Paul made me watch it when I was in my 30s. I remember seeing a clip of it when I was maybe 10 or 11, and oh my God, I just had the worst nightmares from this small clip I saw of it. Ugh.
And it's so funny too, because I watched a lot of really scary horror movies over the years, like movies that were definitely way, way scarier than Poltergeist. But I only realized that once I watched it 3 or 4 years ago with my horror movie group of friends, and it was honestly a blast. We had so much fun watching it, and it was a great experience for me to watch this movie that I had made so big in my head in that setting.
Yeah.
So I loved it.
It's a fun movie. It's a classic.
Yeah. All right, that was a very long intro, right? But here we go.
It might be our longest ever.
So, for all of you who don't know the movie, as I said, it was released in 1982. It was directed by Tobe Hooper. He's an American horror genre director. And the screenplay was co-authored by Steven Spielberg. And it's based on a story by Steven Spielberg. At the time the movie was produced, Spielberg was actually directing Annie's favorite movie, E.T., and therefore he couldn't direct it himself. That's why Hooper was chosen in Spielberg's place. Stephen actually wanted Poltergeist to be a sequel to his movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and he wanted to name this sequel Night Skies. And I think we talked about this before.
Yeah.
I just don't remember which episode, but we definitely did mention it. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's all starting to blend together.
Was it the Hopkinsville?
Maybe, yeah. Could be.
Maybe.
So somehow the focus then moved away from the extraterrestrial horror and towards ghost horror. I would actually love to see a Spielberg Night Skies. I think that would be fun. I think that would be like a kind of cooler, more 80s vibe Signs.
Yeah.
Kind of in that direction, right?
I think everybody would like that. That's another... I didn't watch Close Encounters of the Third Kind until also Paul made me watch it in my 30s. So, I'm a wimp, as it turns out. I am a giant wimp who has a podcast where I talk about the things that terrify me. It's fine. It's fine. It's cheaper than therapy. All right.
So, Poltergeist takes place in California in a housing community called Cuesta Verde. And it centers the Freeling family, so that's Steve, Diane, and their 3 children, Dana, Robbie, and Carol Ann. And one night, the youngest child, Carol Ann, starts to communicate with the static TV set and creepily explains, "They're here," which also became one of the 100 most famous movie quotes of all time.
Oh, yeah.
By the American Institute of Film. So, long story short, the family now has a ghost problem. Is it one? Is it several ghosts? Who can say? And at first the haunting seems to be all fun and games, like it's stacking chairs and it's sliding the kids across the kitchen floor. I mean, it's great fun for the whole family. And attention, spoilers from now on. If you haven't seen the movie, go watch it first and come back. Or if you don't have time right now or you don't care, you don't want to be spoiled, please skip the next, I don't know, 6 minutes, 7 minutes, who can say?
We're just going to tell you a little bit about what the plot's like, that's all.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Skip now.
Okay.
All right. So, but then the presence in the house becomes more and more sinister. The toys get all creepy, and the tree's getting the munchies for Robbie. And the worst part, 5-year-old Carol Ann gets sucked into a portal and talks out of the TV. And that's not good.
That's never good.
Parapsychological expert is called in, and the spiritual medium, and they're like, yep, you got yourself a poltergeist. Poltergeist is actually a German word. Poltern means making loud noises, and Geist, well, obviously that means ghost. You might remember some of this from our episode on the Enfield poltergeist case, maybe, I think. According to Wikipedia, a poltergeist is a, quote, type of ghost or spirit that is responsible for physical disturbance such as loud noises and objects being moved or destroyed. Most claims of functional descriptions of poltergeists show them as being capable of pinching, biting, hitting, and tripping people. Tripping is fun. They are also depicted as capable of the movement or levitation of objects such as furniture and cutlery, or noises such as knocking on doors. Foul smells are also associated with poltergeist occurrences, as well as spontaneous fires and different electrical issues such as flickering lights. They have traditionally been described as troublesome spirits who haunt a particular person instead of a specific location. End quote. And that's interesting because usually poltergeists tend to revolve around teenage girls, I think. But in this movie, the ghost or ghosts centers around the 5-year-old.
Yeah, they get really fixated on that child. I think it's more recent, isn't it? The thought of poltergeist activity sort of emanating from a living person. I feel like I've been interested in these topics, the paranormal, for a long time. And when I had an apartment, which you've all heard me discuss back in the day, where things would go flying in St. Augustine, and I always considered that poltergeist activity. I feel like it's just more recent that we think of poltergeist being caused by living people. It doesn't really matter for today's episode, but I'm just mentioning it so one of you will remember to bring this up in the Facebook group, because I think it'll be an interesting conversation.
So anyway, they have a poltergeist and nobody wants that. The making noise is annoying, sure, but it's the physical attacks that are really worrisome. I mean, biting, scratching, pinching. No, thank you.
Mm-mm.
So they figure out that all the Cuesta Verde houses were built on an ancient cemetery and that several mean-tempered spirits are trying to cross over. Now, this whole premise could be kind of problematic in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people think, oh, it's an Indian burial ground, an IBG. And that's actually a really problematic cinematic trope for all sorts of reasons, ranging from good old-fashioned racism to just super inaccurate history and everything in between. But the house in Poltergeist is not built on a cursed ancient Indian burial ground. They even say it's not. They're very specific that it's not an Indian burial ground.
Also, you see all the caskets coming up from the ground.
Exactly. Yeah, it's just such a common thing. I think Amityville Horror has a lot to answer for that. But it's a thing that a lot of us wrongly assume is part of. There's an article or two. There's one really good article that we'll link to in our sources that has a really worthwhile read and interesting explanation of the many issues surrounding this. But we don't need to get into it now.
You know how most houses have this one room where you throw everything in and you swear that you will clean it up soon and you will unpack all the boxes and you will make it a really nice room, and then years pass by and, you know, it's such a mess that you avoid going in there all along. Because the Freelings now have such a room, and it's the children's room that now houses a huge portal. And everything is swirling around in the air, and, you know, it's one of those rooms where you just want to lock the door forever. It's a bit like Monica's secret messy room in Friends.
Or, you know, my secret messy room. It's not that I'm feeling attacked, but you know that I just reclaimed the room full of boxes. But thank God there were no possums or portals discovered during the sorting out of that room. Yeah.
The mom in this movie is super badass, and she ties a rope around her waist and she enters the portal, kind of Theseus style, and she gets Carol Ann out. Hooray.
Yay.
The portal is closed now, or destroyed, or whatnot. I really can't remember that part. And the medium declares the house to be clean now. From the spirits, not, you know. It was a clean house all along.
Yeah.
The family then decides to leave the house because and they want to stay at a Holiday Inn for a while. But in absurd stupidity, Steve goes off to his office first, and Dana is on a date. I mean, teenagers, am I right? And Diane is at home with the two younger kids, and she, wants to pack up some stuff. And honestly, why? Why would you be like, hey, our house just kidnapped our kindergartner and tried to kill us several times, and we need to leave, but first we need to finish several tasks. Fuck that. Get your kids, run out of there. Of course, the poltergeist attacks Diane and the kids, and all of a sudden there are coffins and skeletons erupting from the ground. And Steve comes home just in time, and Diane and the kids jump into the car, and off they go to the Holiday Inn, which is the end. Until Poltergeist 2. But that's not what we're here for today.
No, we have so much to talk about. Okay. So Poltergeist starred Craig T. Nelson as Steve Freeling, Jo Beth Williams played Diane Freeling, Dominique Dunn was Dana Freeling, and Oliver Robbins was Robbie Freeling. Also, Heather O'Rourke played Carol Ann, the creepy little "they're here" child. So creepy. She was so good in that role. The movie opened on June 6, 1982 in the United States and Canada, and it earned $6.8 million the first weekend that it was open. In total, the movie made $77 million worldwide, and I would say that's a huge success, especially as the production of the movie cost a mere $10.7 million. So, yeah, that was a hit. The movie was nominated for 3 Academy Awards, also known as the Oscars. They were nominated for Best Original Score, Sound Effects Editing, and Visual Effects. Overall, the movie was an enormous box office success. The audience absolutely loved it, and it made it the most successful horror movie of 1982.
Yeah, and that's also the same year as John Carpenter's The Thing came out, and that was not well received at all, but it's now an absolute horror classic.
I've still never seen it. The beginning it reminds me too much of a toilet spider situation, and I can't handle it. But Poltergeist was not only well received by the audience, critics also gave the movie glowing reviews. Roger Ebert said this about the movie, quote, "This is the movie the Amityville Horror dreamed of being. It begins with the same ingredients, a happy American family living in a big comfortable house. It provides similar warnings of doom. Household objects move by themselves. The weather seems different around the house than anywhere else. And it ends with a similar apocalypse. Spirits take total possession of the house and terrorize the family. Even some of the special effects are quite similar, as when greasy goo begins to ooze around the edges of a door jamb. But Poltergeist is an effective thriller, not so much because of the special effects as because Hooper and Spielberg have tried to see the movie's strange events through the eyes of the family members, instead of just standing back and letting the special effects overwhelm the cast along with the audience. Hooper and Spielberg hold our interest by observing the everyday rituals of this family so closely that, since the family seems real, the weird events take on a certain credibility by association. That's during the first hour of the movie. Then all hell breaks loose, and the movie begins to operate on the same plane as Alien or Altered State, as a shocking special effects sound and light show. Nobody ever does decide whether a poltergeist really is involved in the events of the house, or who the poltergeist may be. But if that doesn't prevent them from naming the movie Poltergeist, I guess it shouldn't keep us from enjoying it." End quote. Okay, now I think it's time to talk about the creepy and spooky and sad stuff that surrounds the movie. There's a reason why, whenever you mention cursed movies, Poltergeist almost always comes up first.
So first we need to talk about Dominique Ellen Dunn, who portrayed the eldest Freeling daughter in the Poltergeist movie, Dana Freeling. Dominique was born on 23rd of November 1959 in Santa Monica, California, as one of 5 children to the famous film producer and author Dominique Dunn. True crime people will know him from his reports on infamous murder trials. But before he became this acclaimed true crime author, he was a very successful film producer. I'd say one of his best-known movies might be The Panic in Needle Park, starring Al Pacino. And today you will learn about how Mr. Dunn ended up writing true crime reports and books. In 1954, Dominique Dunn married Ellen Beatrice Griffin, and the couple first lived in New York and later relocated to LA. We have a wedding photo, and they were an absolutely stunning couple. So their daughter Dominique was born in 1959, and she was the third of a total of 5 children. Unfortunately, 2 children, 2 girls, died in infancy. Dominique, Alexander, and Griffin Dunn, who you might know as the director of Addicted to Love starring Meg Ryan or Practical Magic with Nicole Kidman and Sandra Bullock, are the 3 surviving children.
Yeah, everybody knows Practical Magic. I think at least a lot of our listeners know Practical Magic.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
So Dominic and Ellen divorced in 1965. Some sources say 1967, so I don't know.
They might have separated and then it became final, that
Maybe,
kind of thing.
Yeah, I guess so. And I think Ellen and the kids moved to New York, but Dominique would later return to LA to further her acting career. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, Dominique made appearances in several TV shows like Family, Lou Grant, Fame, and Breaking Away. But her biggest part came in 1982, when she was cast as Dana Freeling in Poltergeist. In 1981, Dominique had met a man named John Thomas Sweeney, who worked as sous chef at the, at that time, very hip restaurant Ma Maison that was located on Melrose Avenue. Ma Maison had opened in 1973, and fun fact, one of the investors was Gene Kelly. I think he invested $5,000.
Wow.
Also interesting, Ma Maison was where the famous Austrian chef Wolfgang Puck started out in LA. His career started there. He became chef and part owner in the mid-70s. You might know him as the guy who usually does the Oscar dinner.
Yeah, he's really popular here. I think a lot of people will recognize the name at least, I think.
Ma Maison was so exclusive that the phone number was unlisted. Apparently the owner, a man named Patrick Terrell, was quoted, quote, "If you don't have the number, we don't want you here," end quote. Well, rumor also has it that you could pay the concierge of the Beverly Wilshire Hotel $5 and he would give you the phone number. So you see, exclusivity is often a mere illusion.
Right.
Back to Dominique. So she had met the sous chef John Thomas Sweeney at a party in 1981, and after only dating a couple of weeks, the two moved in together. So I think that Dominique had lived in that house and John Thomas Sweeney had just moved in with her, right? It was a very lovely 1-bedroom house on Rangeley Avenue in West Hollywood.
We're now going to be discussing intimate partner violence.
The relationship pretty quickly turned sour. John was very possessive and jealous, and Dominique was this beautiful young woman from a well-known Hollywood family. Her career was just starting out, and John became more and more aggressive. Physical fights ensued, and one day in August of 1982, he even yanked out a fistful of her hair, and Dominique managed to get out of the house and flee to her mom's, where she stayed for a couple of days.
Mm-hmm.
And John Thomas Sweeney showed up there and banged on the doors and windows, demanding to talk to Dominique, which is, the audacity.
Yeah.
And Ellen, of course, told him to get lost or she would call the police and have him arrested. And he did leave eventually. But unfortunately, a couple of days later, Dominique returned to her home in West Hollywood and the relationship continued. Only a month later, in yet another fight, John started to strangle Dominique. And thank God a friend was staying over and he was in the next room, and all of a sudden he heard what he described as, quote, loud gagging noises, end quote. And he entered the room and John let go of Dominique's throat and Dominique yelled that he had tried to kill her. But John Thomas Sweeney insisted that that's not true and that it was all just a misunderstanding, and he told her to come back to bed. And she was like, yeah, okay, I'll be right there. I just need to go to the bathroom. And she actually climbed out of the bathroom window, ran over to her car and started the motor. And when John heard the car, he jumped out of the bed and raced down the driveway and jumped onto the hood. And Dominique stopped and waited for him to get off the hood, and then she sped off to her mom's place.
Jesus, can you imagine? I wish she'd run him over.
Now this time she broke off the relationship once and for all. Sweeney moved out of the house and Dominique returned to her home and had, of course, all the locks changed. Again, very smart. That's a very good thing to do.
Yeah.
A few weeks later, on 30th of October 1982, Dominique was at her house rehearsing some scenes for a TV show she was working on. With her was another actor from that show, and while they were rehearsing their dialogues, John Thomas Sweeney showed up at her house and Dominique was talking to him through the locked door. But after a while, she agreed to step out for a moment, and her colleague stayed inside. And he heard them arguing, and then he heard 2 smacking sounds and screams, and then a loud thud. And he was super scared. And he decided to call the police, but apparently, according to him, they told him that he phoned the wrong jurisdiction, which is so weird to me. I looked it up. He would have called 911, right? Because that was invented in 1967. I don't know, even if he called the wrong police jurisdiction, how can he just be like, yeah, sorry, not our problem? I don't understand. Am I missing something there? Because
No, I don't know.
Maybe I don't understand something about the American system. I don't know.
No, I don't know. I always thought that 911 had been called. There have been occasional cases, unfortunately, they're rare, but cases where the people that you get when you call 911 are not, they're not on it. You know, they get things wrong and people lose their lives as a result. But I honestly don't know enough about it. But either way, it's awful no matter what happened.
Horrible,
you know, just that extra delay. I'm not sure that it would have made any difference in this case, but it's always upsetting when it happens. And to be fair, a lot of people call 911 with absolute nonsense as well. Like the sort of calls 911 operators get that, you know, my pizza's late, things like this. It's
Jesus.
Yeah.
So anyway, apparently the actor friend then called a friend and he told him that if he is found dead today, John Thomas Sweeney did it. And then he left the house through the back entrance and he sneaked around the corner towards the front entrance. And there, in the bushes, he saw Sweeney kneeling over Dominique's lifeless body. And finally, somehow the police was called, and indeed, they thought it's necessary to drive over there. And when they arrived, they were greeted by John Thomas Sweeney, who was waiting in the driveway with his hands over his head. And he told them that he had tried to kill his girlfriend and that he had tried to end his own life. And he was taken into custody. Dominique was not dead. She was taken to the Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in LA, where she was put on life support, but she never woke up again. The brain damage due to the lack of oxygen was too severe, and on 4th of November, no brain activity could be detected during the scans. The parents had to make the absolutely heartbreaking decision to let Dominique go. Her heart and kidneys were donated. Dominique was buried on 6th of November in a very private ceremony with just her family and closest friends. But what about John Thomas Sweeney? Well, he had been held on a bail of $75,000, but once Dominique was dead, his charges were changed to first-degree murder, and the bail was raised to $500,000. His trial started in August of 1983, and he pled not guilty. The verdict came on 21st of September 1983. The Los Angeles Times from 22nd of September 1983 printed the following article on page 87, quote, "Actress Slayer convicted of manslaughter. Ex-chef acquitted of murder count in girlfriend's death." By Ted Rohrlich, Times staff writer. Former Mami Soul chef John Sweeney was convicted Wednesday of voluntary manslaughter in the 1982 strangulation of his one-time girlfriend, actress Dominique Dunn. The verdict was a victory for the defense. Sweeney, 27, sat hunched at a counsel table in a packed Santa Monica courtroom and, hands clasped in front of him, sighed deeply as jurors acquitted him of the more serious charge of second-degree murder, punishable by 15 years to life in prison, before finding him guilty of manslaughter. Voluntary manslaughter is punishable by a maximum term of 6 years. Then Sweeney looked at the jurors who had wrestled with the degree of his legal responsibility for Dunn's death during 7 days of deliberation and slowly nodded his head. Behind him and to his immediate left, in the first row of the courtroom's spectator section, sat the disappointed mother of his 22-year-old victim. Ellen Griffin Dunn put her hands to her face and bowed her head in tearful silence. As Superior Court Judge Burton Katz thanked jurors for their service and told them they had made the justice system work, the victim's father, Dominique Dunn, a film producer and novelist, spoke up. "Not for our family," he said. After jurors left the courtroom, Katz told Dunn he would have a right to speak when Sweeney is sentenced October 31st. But the obviously embittered Dunn said, quote, "Too late then. You withheld important information from this jury about this man's history of violent behavior." End quote. Sweeney had admitted to a sheriff's deputy that he strangled Dunn after she rebuffed his attempt at a reconciliation last October 30th outside the West Los Angeles house they once shared. Dunn, best known for her role in the film Poltergeist, died 6 days later without regaining consciousness. But Sweeney testified at his trial that he could not remember actually choking her. Deputy Public Defender Michael Adelson, in urging a manslaughter conviction, argued that Sweeney choked Dunn in the heat of passion. But Deputy District Attorney Stephen Barshop argued that Sweeney should be convicted of second-degree murder because his actions showed malice aforethought, which can be exhibited either as an intent to kill or as wanton recklessness likely to result in death. Barshop said he was certain that jurors would have agreed with him if Katz had allowed another former girlfriend of Sweeney to testify about injuries she suffered at the chef's hand. The former girlfriend testified at a pre-trial hearing that Sweeney had injured her 10 times during the course of a 2-year relationship that ended in 1979, according to Barshop and Adelson. She was hospitalized twice for her injuries, she said. However, in a pre-trial proceeding, Katz ruled that the value of this evidence to the prosecution was outweighed by its prejudicial effect against Sweeney. Despite Barshop's claim, jury foreman Paul Spiegel said that he was not sure that the panel would have ruled any differently had they heard the former girlfriend's testimony. Adelson said his client, who slashed his wrist with a razor in his jail cell last December, remained severely depressed. Jurors also found Sweeney guilty of a misdemeanor assault against Dunn a month before the fatal attack. End quote.
I think it should have been first-degree murder. I mean, the nonsense, and it's a pattern you see all the time, isn't it? I don't even believe that he was trying to take his own life. Like he said after he killed her that he tried to, he was trying to kill himself with pills that he had taken in his pocket. So that means that he knew before he even went to her house that either they would get together or she would die. Because...
Exactly. Why else bring pills then?
Right. And it's not like this is the first time you ever choked somebody. She broke up with you because you choked her almost unconscious. Yep. You know what I mean? It's so upsetting when the victim really does everything that they're supposed to do. And yet you still end up with this bullshit. I know it makes everyone really mad.
So in the end, John Thomas Sweeney was only in prison for 3.5 years out of the 6.5 years he was sentenced to. 3.5 years, Jesus.
I can't even. Yeah.
So he was released on parole in 1986 and he found work as a head chef in an upscale restaurant in Santa Monica. And when Dominique's family heard about that, they printed out flyers that they handed to the people that were about to enter the restaurant. And the flyer read something like, "The food you're about to eat was prepared by the hands that killed Dominique Dunn." Sweeney then quit his job and he left L.A.
Yeah. Well, he changed his name. It reminds me of Karla Homolka, just out there murdering people, ruining the lives of so many people, and then serving almost no time, getting out of prison, changing your name, and just starting a new life.
Yeah.
Fuck right off. It makes me so angry. It's such a failure of the justice system when this happens.
This man has never paid for his crime. Never.
No.
3.5 years for murdering a young woman because she didn't want to be with you anymore.
Right.
Fuck this guy. Seriously.
Yeah.
Also, apparently, after some years, the Dunn family was contacted by a man who said his daughter was engaged to a chef from California, and it turned out that that chef was in fact Sweeney. And then the Dunn family contacted the woman and told her what he had done. And I don't know, I think I read that he sued the Dunn family for harassment or he threatened to sue them, something like that.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me. I know he's still a chef and he's always going to be a murderer as far as we're concerned.
So Dominic Dunn, the father, had kept a diary during Sweeney's trial and he would later write an article about it for Vanity Fair titled "Justice, a Father's Account of the Trial of His Daughter's Killer." And that's basically what started his career as a true crime journalist. He would go on to cover high-profile cases like O.J. Simpson, the Menendez brothers, and Klaus von Bülow. And Ellen Beatrix Dunn became an activist and founded the victims' rights group Justice for Homicide Victims. What might be also interesting to note, the Dominique Dunn murder and the following trial also marked the beginning of the end for Ma Maison. Many people believe the owner of the restaurant, Patrick Terrell, had helped Sweeney with his legal costs, but apparently that was just a rumor. And in his book, A Taste of Hollywood, The Story of Ma Maison, Terrell says the following, quote, "The last time I ever saw or talked to Sweeney was when he completed his shift on the evening of the attack. Yet, Some would have you believe that I played a much more prominent role in Sweeney's defense. Some people have angrily accused me of supporting John Sweeney by providing his bail and legal services, but none of it is true. Many people didn't come back to my restaurant because they associated Mamiso with the murder. I never showed it because I had a business to run, but it really affected both me and Mamiso. Dominique Dunn's death was tragic for those who knew and loved her." End quote.
It was so sad. It's such an infuriating case. And you can see almost why they would say it was almost like a curse, because it wasn't just a cut and dry situation, was it? It was, she really was trying so hard to get away from him. And that goes back to that episode we did, doesn't it, about breakup violence and how common and how dangerous it is.
Most dangerous after you break up and leave, yeah.
That's right. Just say no. Just call the police if they knock on your door. You don't owe them anything. All right. Now it's time to talk about Heather O'Rourke. She was the 6-year-old girl who played Carol Ann Freeling. Roger Ebert called her, quote, "an open-faced, long-haired, innocent little cherub," end quote, which is true. Heather Michelle O'Rourke was born in San Diego, California on December 27, 1975, to Kathleen and Michael O'Rourke. She was the couple's second child. They already had a daughter, Tammy, who was born in 1971. Kathleen and Michael divorced in 1981, and Kathleen and her 2 daughters moved into a trailer park in Anaheim. Tammy was dabbling into acting, and she managed to get roles as a dancer in the 1981 movie Pennies from Heaven. So one day, while Tammy was filming, Kathleen and Heather were having lunch in the MGM Studios cafeteria. And Steven Spielberg happened to be there at the time. He was casting for this upcoming horror movie, and he happened to see Heather eating lunch. Now, he was looking for a little girl that was, quote, every mother's dream, and Heather absolutely fit what he wanted Carol Ann to look like. Long blonde hair, beautiful smile, huge blue eyes. So he went over and he introduced himself and asked if Heather wanted to audition for this role in an upcoming movie. And Kathleen and Heather agreed, and they met with him in his office. There, Heather had to act scared of different toys, and she must have been absolutely amazing because she got the part. Another super talented young actress who had auditioned for the role of Carol Ann was Drew Barrymore, but she would go on to play Gertie in E.T. All right, so Heather starred in Poltergeist, and it became this huge success. Heather earned $35,000, according to some sources we checked, for her first role. She also got roles in shows like Happy Days and Leave It to Beaver. In 1984, Kathleen remarried, and thanks to Heather's success, the family was able to purchase a home in Big Bear Lake, California, where Heather also attended school between her acting jobs. In 1986, Poltergeist 2 was released. That takes place 1 year after the end of the first movie, and once more shows the fight of the Freeling family against evil spirits. Heather earned $75,000 for her role in Poltergeist 2. Around that time, she also started to appear in theater plays. Everything was pointing toward a great future for the very talented, now 11-year-old. In early 1987, Heather was starting to show flu-like symptoms, and so they took her to the doctor, but they didn't find anything serious and said it was probably just a cold. She was brought in at least 3 times in that first month, and every time the doctors assured her mother that it was just a flu. But symptoms got worse. She often felt nauseous. Her legs and feet showed severe swelling. So they brought her in again, and more tests were done. And the conclusion was that Heather was suffering from giardiasis, which is a parasitic disease caused by a microorganism called Giardia duodenalis. Usually how you contract it is by ingesting contaminated food or water. And so the doctors and family thought that Heather must have gotten the disease because of contaminated well water from their home at Big Bear Lake. It's also, I think, really common if you go swimming in certain lakes or ponds. You know what I mean? You run the risk of getting it there.
Yeah.
The young girl was prescribed medicine to treat the illness, and at first she really started to feel better. But then during a following checkup, the medical team realized that even though the parasite was gone, Heather's intestines still were showing really serious inflammation. Heather was diagnosed with Crohn's disease. So I have Crohn's disease, and an oversimplification of an autoimmune disease, it's basically when your immune system works a little bit too well and it attacks things that are not in fact infected. So if it's your joints, maybe you have rheumatoid arthritis. If it's MS, which Dominique Dunn's mother lived with, then it's your central nervous system, your brain. Crohn's disease attacks your digestive system and can attack anywhere within your digestive system. The most common presentation I had when I was a kid, especially in high school, was a really high fever, a really high white count, super swollen glands, exhaustion, and a mouthful of canker sores. I was misdiagnosed with mono a lot. Like, a lot. Anyhow, Heather was put on medication and everything seemed fine. She continued to work on Poltergeist 3, a movie that was not as well received as the previous 2 films. As usual, she was very professional on set and a hardworking actress. She showed no signs of discomfort or pain, and really the only way you'd know that she was battling Crohn's is she's got moon face. You can see the swelling in her face that were caused by the steroids she was taking. In September of 1987, the movie was wrapped, and Heather, Kathleen, and Tammy and their stepdad decided to take an extended vacation to celebrate Heather's latest movie. Kathleen later said that they had a fantastic time. On the morning of the 31st of January, 1988, Kathleen was awakened by Heather. The 12-year-old said that she didn't feel well. She had vomited a few times and didn't feel like she could go to school. The next morning, Heather complained that she couldn't swallow her breakfast. Her abdomen was swollen, and Kathleen noticed that the girl's fingers and toes were starting to turn blue, and she was having trouble breathing. She immediately called the hospital, and the doctor told Kathleen to bring her daughter in immediately. But it was not even a minute later that Heather collapsed, and Kathleen decided to call an ambulance rather than drive herself. Paramedics arrived soon after, and as she was taken to the ambulance, she told her mom, "I love you," which would be her last words. On her way to the hospital, she suffered a cardiac arrest and passed away shortly after during an emergency surgery. The following is from the Los Angeles Times, Los Angeles, California, February 3rd, 1988, page 3. Poltergeist star Heather O'Rourke dies at age of 12. By Bert A. Folkart, Times staff writer. Heather O'Rourke, the terrified youngster sucked into a spectral vacuum by supernatural spirits in the Poltergeist films, has died on an operating table at a San Diego hospital, it was reported on Tuesday. The 12-year-old ingenue, who finished filming Poltergeist 3 last June, in which she starred as the angelic Carol Ann Freeling for the 3rd time, died late Monday afternoon. A spokeswoman for Children's Hospital of San Diego identified the cause of death as intestinal stenosis, a severe bowel obstruction that the girl evidently had from birth. The obstruction caused an infection that in turn brought on septic shock. The shock prompted a full cardiac and pulmonary arrest, the spokeswoman said. Her agent, David Wardlow, said she had been rushed to the hospital after complaining of abdominal pain. Heather's parents, who live in Big Bear but are also believed to have a home in San Diego, were too distraught to comment, Wardlow said. Ron Pennington, a spokesman for Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer Pictures Incorporated, where the Poltergeist films were produced, starting in 1981, said the studio extends its sympathy to her parents and family. What proved to be her final film will be released this summer, he added. Heather, who was also seen regularly on television's Happy Days, Webster, and Still the Beaver, has brought 2 catchphrases into the language with the first 2 poltergeists. The first was, "They're here," which she said with eerie calm after coming into contact with strange forces while peering into an apparently blank TV screen. The second was, "They're back," which was featured in the sequel. Heather, quote, always looked like Alice in Wonderland and could memorize a 60-page script in about an hour, Meyer said. Of all the things she was proud of, he added, she was proudest of being elected president of her 5th grade class at Big Bear Elementary School, end quote.
So sad.
It's so sad. So the intestinal stenosis that's mentioned as the cause of death in the article was a severe bowel obstruction that Heather apparently had from birth, and that had caused an infection and subsequently septic shock. The surgery I had last November was also to correct a stenosis. In my case, it was caused by scar tissue from repeated inflammation from the Crohn's disease, narrowing an already narrow portion of the small intestine. It's risky because once everything gets so narrow, you can form a blockage, and in a worst-case scenario, the blockage could rupture, which causes septic shock, and that is exactly what happened to Heather. It has since been thought that Heather's obstruction was possibly not Crohn's disease, but, like we just said, was maybe something she was born with. Either way is possible. It doesn't really matter, I guess, what the reason was. Either way, it was devastating. Also, one thing to be aware of when you talk to your kids about bodily functions, because everyone has that conversation, and you'll notice that Heather mentioned vomiting, and that's one of the first signs, because when you have a blockage, nothing else can go down, so it's all coming up and out. Also, if you have a dog, anybody with a pet that might eat a rock, we had an emergency surgery on a dog once because they ate a rock, and after a day or two of vomiting, took them in, and that's what we found. But I think it's something important to mention with kids, or just that everybody should know, because I feel like it's not something everyone knows, that, teach them that not everyone poops and passes gas. But also, if both of these things stop happening, you need to let somebody know, because it could make you really, really sick,
It's a good point, yeah.
Yeah. She was put to rest at the Westwood Memorial Park, and her epitaph says, Heather O'Rourke, beloved daughter, sister, December 27th, 1975 to February 1st, 1988, Carol Ann, Poltergeist 123. Yeah, really sad.
So that meant that 2 actresses who worked on Poltergeist died shortly after finishing one of the movies. Dominique died shortly after Poltergeist was released, and Heather died shortly after filming Poltergeist 3. And this wouldn't be the only deaths connected to the movie franchise. Julian Beck, who played the evil but constantly creepily grinning preacher Kane in Poltergeist 2.
So creepy.
He's so creepy. He died shortly after filming was done, but his death wasn't as unexpected as the other 2 we discussed already. Julian had been diagnosed with stomach cancer in 1983. The illness ultimately took its toll on 14th of September 1985. So Julian was not only a movie actor, he also was the founder of the Living Theatre, which is a theatre group that he started in the 1940s, and it was rather unconventional for the time.
Just a little.
Yeah, they took off their clothes on stage, they were very loud and absurd, and I mean this in the dramatical context. They were always addressing social issues. During the counterculture movement of the 1960s, Julian's group was hailed as an experimental, anarchistic theatre. I think that the Living Theatre was also kind of a commune. They practiced free love, and Julian was in an open marriage with his wife Malina. Both were openly bisexual, I think, and the reason why I think this is worth noting is, to make it very clear that bisexuality is not a modern-day trend. It has always been valid.
Yeah.
Another actor who was part of Poltergeist 2 died only a year after the movie was released, Will Sampson, a Muskogee actor who played Taylor, the medicine man. You might also know Will from his role as Chief Brompton in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. With Will too, his death didn't come sudden and unexpected. He had suffered from scleroderma, which is a degenerative autoimmune disease that affects the skin, the lungs and the heart. And after a heart and lung transplantation, he died on 3rd of June 1987. He was not only an actor, he was a very gifted painter and a rodeo performer. I think that's also how he was discovered. I love this description of Will that I found in the Colorado Springs Gazette-Telegraph, 7th of May 1977, page 52. It was an article that was written about him after he starred in the movie White Buffalo, along with Charles Bronson. And the article is titled, Will Sampson Earns Instant Stardom, and it's just a little excerpt. Quote, to this day, Will Sampson hasn't seen many movies. He was born in Oklahoma 43 years ago. He had little formal schooling, and at 14 he started to work in rodeos. He always drew from the time he was a small boy. He worked on ranches as a cowpuncher, Jesus, and taught art to underprivileged kids in reservation schools. He wandered the country, and in the Korean War he joined the Navy, finally becoming a pilot. Sampson has worked as a hunting guide, a trapper, and fisherman, as a lumberjack, as a blacksmith. He has been an oil-filled roughneck, a construction worker, a telephone lineman. He has worked every event in the rodeo and is acknowledged to be one of the finest horsemen alive. But first and last, he considers himself a painter. He feels that this was preordained. Quote, the old people of my tribe taught me, he explains. Certain members of the tribe are born to be prophets or artists, and the old people pick them out and teach them what they ought to know. End quote.
That's amazing. He really was a Renaissance man. Just so talented in so many different ways. And yeah, as you said, he unfortunately died of complications after he knew it was a risky transplant surgery, but he needed it anyhow. So that means 4 actors who worked on Poltergeist died very shortly after either filming or after the release, and of course, this invites a lot of theories about some bad things going on. There are lots of people who believe in the Poltergeist curse. But why would that movie even be cursed? Well, legend has it that in the scene when Diane, the mother in Poltergeist, falls into the pool and all these skeletons pop up, that these skeletons were actually real skeletons and not plastic or rubber or plaster ones. Rumor has it that Steven Spielberg insisted on using real skeletons as they were supposedly cheaper than fake ones. And I knew this might sound really fake to you, it definitely did to us, but apparently it's true. The man who was responsible for the practical effects on set, Craig Reardon, admitted this under oath during a deposition against Steven Spielberg. Quote, I acquired a number of actual biological surgical skeletons. These are actual skeletons from people. I think the bones are acquired from India. We dressed them so they looked not like bleached, clean, bolted together skeletons, but instead disintegrating cadavers. End quote. Apparently, they had purchased 13 sets of skeletons. But wait, it gets worse. The actress who portrayed Diane Freeling, JoBeth Williams, had no idea that she was in a pool with real human remains. She was quoted in an interview for a TV special called TV Land, Myths and Legends, saying, quote, You have to understand that this sequence took probably 4 to 5 days to shoot. So I was in mud and goop all day, every day, for like 4 or 5 days, with skeletons all around me as I was screaming. In my innocence and naivete, I assumed these were not real skeletons. I assumed they were prop skeletons made out of plastic or rubber. I found out, as did the whole crew, that they were using real skeletons because it's far too expensive to make fake skeletons out of rubber. And I think everybody got real creeped out by the idea of that. End quote. Yeah, that would be real creepy. For sure. I'd also be kind of annoyed. I guess anybody can just buy them, but I mean, the idea of donating a loved one's body or my own body to science, like, absolutely, learn from whatever you can from me so the next generation of healers can learn things, but that's different from popping up in a pool. And then once this information became public, obviously everybody then started to have a very ominous feeling on set. And I mean, yeah, they're gonna. And the crew kept having this really creepy, dark, menacing feeling even when filming Poltergeist 2, and it was only after the filming was done during the last evening that Will Sampson went on set to perform a cleansing ritual. And apparently, the entire crew reported this feeling of just instant relief, like something very heavy had been lifted off their shoulders, which I absolutely believe in.
I'm just getting goosebumps right now. I don't know why. It's so creepy.
He was a very talented man. They were lucky to have him as part of that franchise. Yeah.
All right, so just to be thorough, I'd like to add that there is another actor associated with the movies who died a very tragic death, but that was 17 years after he had played a role in the original Poltergeist. And his name is Lou Perryman, and he had played a minor role in Poltergeist. He played the construction worker Pugsley. On 1st of April 2009, he was in his home in Austin, Texas, when a 26-year-old man entered his house and murdered the 67-year-old Perryman. The attacker was 26-year-old Christopher Tatum, who then stole Lou's car and fled the scene. And he later turned himself in, telling the police that he's pretty sure that he had killed the owner of the car he had stolen. The police made a welfare check and found the body of Lou Perryman. One of the theories concerning the curse says that all the child actors who were in the original Poltergeist died tragically, and I assume they considered Dominique Dunn a child actor because she played a 16-year-old, even though she was a grown-up, very young woman at age 22. I have to say that must make Oliver Robbins feel a little bit uneasy because he's still very much alive.
Yeah.
He played Robbie Freeling, the middle child, and in an interview with Yahoo Entertainment, he was asked about the curse, and he replied, quote, I hope there isn't a curse because I'm still around. I do believe in the paranormal to some degree, but I don't think there's a curse because those deaths can be explained. You had these tragedies happen, but they were going to happen whether the actors were in the movie or not. Like with Heather, she had a medical condition for which she wasn't treated. So I don't think they are interconnected, end quote.
Yeah. It's easy to see why many people think that there was a curse on this film, and this isn't the only cursed film that we'll be discussing. on this podcast. But if it's one you're watching this Halloween season, now you've got plenty of macabre trivia to share with whoever you're watching it with. Unless you're watching it with your kids. Your kids maybe don't need to know all of this, yet. So, yeah, that's our information on the Poltergeist curse.
Yes. Pretty creepy. I'm really excited to see what our listeners will discuss in our group. If they think it's a curse, it's not a curse. Yeah.
Me too.
Let us know.
Me too. There's a lot to talk about.
Do you have something good?
Yes, 2 parts. So first I have to say my something good is really good mothers-in-law. You hear so many stories. I know so many people with really hard, painful, bad, non-existent relationship with their mothers-in-law that it was really nerve-wracking, and she was amazing. And I'm really, really lucky. Really lucky. And then, of course, winning 2 awards at the Podcast Awards, which I think that was an absolute stunner for both of us. Was it worth staying up into the wee hours, the middle of the night, to watch it live?
Absolutely. I was so tired. I was so tired. It was 3:00 in the morning for me. We had game night before, around midnight my time, and then...
That was really fun, actually. That was a really fun game night.
It was really fun this time. And Philip was so really cute. He stayed up with me, and I was like, I don't even know why we're staying up for this. We're not gonna win anything. And he's like, yeah, you're gonna win. I'm like, no. And then my face was like shock and embarrassment at the same time.
Yeah, Paul was really sad because I kept saying, you guys, we don't have to watch this. Like, I'll just go upstairs alone and sit by myself and watch it. You guys put on a movie or something. Like, don't everybody watch this. And then when I sincerely did not think we had a chance this year. It was such tough competition. Everybody was so good. And Paul was so upset that he wasn't recording me, I guess, when they did say our name, because I guess my face was really something. I'm probably grateful he did not record my face. But yeah, it's pretty amazing. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, once again, thank you.
Thank you for voting, and special thanks to our patrons because you only get 1 award. So we're going to be buying a second award in both of those categories. And so your Patreon money is actually the only reason we can do that. So
exactly. Thank you.
I know it seems like such a trivial thing, but thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. If you have a moment, if you enjoyed this episode or any of our other episodes, please take a moment and leave us a rating and a review. It really means the world to us. We so appreciate it. You can check out our website, which is freshhellpodcast.com. You will find there how to get in touch with us. Also, you'll find links to our merch. And don't forget, we have really exciting Halloween spooky fuckery merch that's only going to be there through Halloween.
That's true. You also find a link to our Patreon if you want to see what it's all about. A link to our Facebook. Our Facebook group is the really funnest, finest, kindest group on the interwebs.
So good.
Our email address is freshhellpodcast@gmail.com. You also find a link to our PO box if you want to send us something cool. And that's it. Please tell your pets we said hi. We miss them. We love them. Hug them. Cuddle them. Give them treats. We just went to the vet with Jam. He had an ear infection, but it's all better now. And be kind to your pets. You're everything they have.
That's right.
Be kind to your fellow human being. And the most important part, be kind to yourself. And it's the hardest thing as well.
It is. It really is. Yeah. All right. Is that it? I think that's everything.
That's it.
Until next week, if you are going through hell,
keep going. Until they're here. Tschüss.
Bye. They're back. It's so creepy. Oh.